Hey, I'm Max, and welcome to Roughshod Brass. Today we'll be talking about basic brass instrument maintenance. Now, this is not intended to be a replacement for professional care. I cannot recommend more strongly that you still take your instrument to a repairman every year for an annual maintenance, just like you take your car every couple thousand miles to a serviceman, right? Because there are things that you can do yourself on a car. Right? You can change your wipers, you can change your washer fluid, but when it comes to changing your filters, changing engine parts, getting into the electrical systems, checking your O2 sensors, your emissions, these are things you need a professional for because they've been trained to do that. Now, if you've been trained yourself, great. But at the same time, you still, every 5,000 miles, you get your car serviced. So it's the same principle with brass instruments. You can apply oil yourself, you can grease your slides, you can change your strings if you have a string mechanism. You still take it to a professional every year to get a sonic bath and a proper cleaning. Yes, that's a real thing. No, it's nothing like what it is in Star Trek. Now, when you do take your horn to a professional, if you're renting, take it to your rental shop because they'll give you a better price. Usually it's free. If you own your own instrument, do not go to a rental shop. Do not go to your local random band supply place, all right? They are not going to treat your horn the way it needs to be treated. You take that to a proper craftsman. The best way to find them is word of mouth. If you have a teacher, ask your teacher who he or she uses, and he or she will most likely give you a pretty good name. But basic maintenance is something else. You shouldn't feel the need to go to a craftsman every time your valves get a little sticky, or if you're having difficulty removing a slide. All that is stuff that you can very easily do yourself, and that's what I'm going to show you in this video. Now, odds are your band director is going to give you the basics of the basics, and if he doesn't, you can always go on Google. What I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you how I've done it, specifically, so that my horns stay in fairly good condition. I'm going to give you a couple tips and tricks that aren't going to be in any manual. This is just stuff that you have to learn through experience or through someone telling you. It's not going to be in a book. What that means is I'm not going to teach you how to put your thumb in a tub of slide grease and rub it down the side of your valve slide. I'm not going to teach you how to restring the mechanism on your horn. So you can just Google that. What I will teach you to do is position your valves correctly after you restring them. And what I will teach you to do is where exactly to apply the grease for best effect, and where to put the oil, and when to put the oil where. These are the 5 tools I'll be using today. I have slide oil for trombone. I have slide gel for tuning slides. I have slide grease here. This is something I do not recommend. I'm just showing it for comparison. And I have rotor and bearing and linkage oil. And these are the 5 instruments we'll be discussing today. I have a basic trombone. That is a Blessing bell front mellophone. That's to demonstrate how to maintain piston valves. And these are 2 types of horns. That's a Kruspe wrap, that's a Geyer wrap, and that's Sophie. To keep your valves properly oiled, it's a matter of personal preference. Some people like them firm, some people like them loose. I'm one of the guys who like them firm. The reason that valves can be firm or loose is because lime builds up inside the mechanism. And when the lime builds up, that starts to stop it up a little. Now, a little bit of lime is not a problem. That makes the valve action nice and tight and responsive, and you feel completely in control. If the valves are loose and they're bouncing all over the place, I don't think it's as damaging in a rotary instrument, but in a piston instrument, I'd reckon that wears out the springs. To keep just the right amount in, to make sure your valves don't get too loose, but you're still movable, because obviously if too much lime builds up, your valve's going to get stuck. Right. So, bearing and linkage oil. You only need 1 little drop in there, and that should be enough to get it moving, for the most part. Now, that's not always the case. And if your valves are still too stuck for you and you need to get them looser, or if you prefer them loose, rotor oil. The first step to putting in rotor oil is to take off the valve caps. Right, that's what it looks like underneath. You want to make sure that you only get the rotor oil in this tiny little spot in the middle, because if it gets in the silicone on the outside, then the silicone begins to swell. That'll stop up your valve for good, and you will need to get a replacement, and those are not cheap. Believe me, I know I've had 3 replaced in the past. Right. Now, that doesn't always work when your valves are really stuck. This horn, actually, the thumb trigger was pretty jammed in there recently, and it took me 2 days to get it unstuck. So when that happens, with your main 3 valves, it's the same thing on a Geyer or a Kruspe. You hold down the relevant valves to release the slides. What you do, and you have to be very, very conservative with this, always put as little as possible. The more you put in, the more likely you are to damage your instrument. So, rotor oil. Tiniest little drop in each. Usually only 1 is necessary, sometimes 2. Sometimes, on a double, you need 4. So this is the valve I'm going to grease. This is the slide I'm going to grease to demonstrate that. Kruspes on the trigger are the big issue. On a Geyer, it gets a little bit more complicated. It takes a second to figure out, to plan where exactly, the slides go. But, it just felt like a maze. What you do is you remove your tuning slide from your instrument, take your rotor oil, put a drop in the side that goes to the thumb valve, and you rotate your instrument to get it in. Again, always be careful. This is a very delicate piece of equipment that you do not want to damage. You'll notice the main differences between a Kruspe and a Geyer. Valve cylinder. For the change valve, the thumb valve is, well, exactly where you would expect it to be if you'd never seen a horn before. Right. Benefits of Holtons over most other Kruspes is they have 2 B-flat tuning slides, coarse and fine. Most only have the coarse one. And believe me, this makes a big difference in small ensemble works. To oil thumb valve, it's the same principle as on a Geyer, but because the valve slides are closer, it is easier. Oiling piston valves. Right, so I use linkage oil for my piston instruments on the grounds that I'm too lazy and too cheap to get piston oil when I don't use my piston instruments nearly as often as I use my rotary instruments. And linkage oil works just fine. And it's a similar principle. You got, 2 ways. You got 3 ways to oil your pistons. I've only ever had to use 2 of them. You have 3 slots on the bottom. That's your clearing out a little bit of lime, but not completely flushing it out. And then you only need 1 drop in each. And that's more than enough. A lot of students, they get one of these with, their rental instrument. They take it off and they just dunk their slide right into it. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to get grease on the inside of my slides. I do not recommend these at all, under any circumstances. If this is your only option, if you can't get a more precise piece of equipment, use your finger or a Q-tip or something and do exactly as I'm about to show you on my slide gel syringe. What you want to do is be very gentle, very conservative. You want a tiny little ring around the edges, close to the bottom as you can without actually getting it inside. The effect of that is when it goes in, the tiny little bit spreads to the rest. Now we want to do, even though these go in the back, is first I'm going to put them in the front. Just wriggle them around, get them spread and so on, get all over, and the other side as well. There. Now that's all in, and so when you again, always make sure you have necessary valves depressed, make ease of entry. And there it is. I was never trained on trombone. So the one brass instrument I'm not all that familiar with. But I do know that for whatever reason, they don't like to put slide grease on their primary slide here, whatever they call this. As for their tuning slide, yes, this you absolutely use slide grease for, and this is well overdue. Right, so the main slide, partly I guess because people don't want to get their fingers full of grease, they have slide oil. I just poured a tiny, tiny drop of oil on each, spread it around, and that keeps this action nice and loose. All right, I think I covered everything for now. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. It would really help me out. And I'll see you next time. Take it easy.